Good morning, everybody, and welcome one and all to this morning's meeting of Children and Family Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Dan Cohen. I will be chairing and am chair of this Scrutiny Board. Our meeting is being webcast on the Council's website so that members of the public who are unable to observe in person can still observe remotely. I'm going to invite board members to introduce themselves and probably for convenience, the people sat around the table for the first item, you guys may as well introduce yourself as well, but just explain obviously that you're here for the first item rather than a board member. As I said, my name is Councillor Dan Cohen. Rob, do you want to?
Morning, everyone. My name is Rob Clayton. I'm Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Morning, Councillor Rick Downs, Ward Member for Otley and Yeadon.
Good morning, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Trish Smith. I'm the councillor for Pudsey, but I'm substituting for Councillor Amanda Carter today.
Should put your name, Councillor. Just there you go.
Oh, good morning. Sorry about that. My name is Jackie Ward and I'm co-opted member.
Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Worsley Ward.
Good morning, Anna Sketo, Parent Governor.
Morning, Kate Blacker, co-opted member.
Morning, Laura Whitaker, co-opted member.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Pouncey. I'm a Chief Officer in the Children and Families Department.
Morning, everyone. I'm Louise Hornsey. I'm a Senior Head of Finance and I'm here for the finance items.
Hi, I'm Phil Evans. I'm the Chief Officer for Transformation and Partnerships in the Children's and Families Directorate. I'm here for the papers on the finance and then the HCP element that Rob will be presenting later.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Farah Khan, Deputy Director for Social Care.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Longworth and I'm the Director of Children and Families.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Executive Board Member for Children's Social Care and Health Partnerships.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Pryor. I'm the Deputy Leader and Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Barton. I'm the new Deputy Director for Learning.
Morning, Emma Flint, Councillor in Wheatwood, subbing for Councillor Bowden, who's not well.
Good morning, Councillor Manaka for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Good morning, Councillor Bromley for Horsforth and Rawdon.
Good morning, everyone. Oliver Edwards, Councillor for Guisey and Rawdon.
Good morning, Councillor Jules Hesselwood, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Alcee and Robin Hood Ward.
Tony Britton, representing Roman Catholic Diocese of Leeds.
Good morning, Councillor Caroline Gruen for Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Good morning, I'm Helen Bellamy and I'm School Staff Representative.
Thank you. Can I thank those members who are subbing this morning? Councillor Smith, Councillor Flint, thank you both very much indeed. Welcome to one of the finest scrutiny boards in the city. And can we also welcome Dan Barton to his first meeting as our new Deputy Director. Welcome. I hope you enjoy this meeting and aim all the difficult questions at him. Even if it's not directly his, we'll just go for it. Good morning and welcome all. Rob, can you take us through the first bits, please?
Yes, of course, Chair. Thank you.
just items 1 to 5, which are the formal elements of the meeting. So item 1 is appeals against refusal of inspection of documents, and there are no appeals against refusal of inspection. Item 2 is items for exclusion, and there are no items for exclusions for the public. Item 3 are late items of business, and there are no late items, Chair. Item 4 is declarations of interest under the Leeds City Council Code of Conduct, and I'll ask members now to declare any if they have any. I'll take silence as none. And then item 5, Chair's apologies, which we've already alluded to, but just to formally mention it, and we have Councillor Trish Smith subbing for Councillor Amanda Carter, and we have Councillor Emma Flint subbing for Councillor Bowden. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Not strictly an apology, but sorry that we have started slightly late this morning with train cancellations, traffic. I think it's a minor miracle everybody's managed to get here and round the table. So well done, everybody, and thank you for that. And I say apologies that we started slightly late. And also pre-apologies. We have a very, very full agenda today. So I will be making sure we keep moving. That may mean not everybody gets to speak on every item, can I urge, please, those presenting to keep things brief, please. We've had extensive papers, so if it's in the papers, we know what it says. So I'm going to try to give far more time for challenge and questions rather than long presentations repeating what's in the pack. And now I'm talking and taking up more time, so let's get moving on. Let's go to minutes item 6. I shall do like I always do and go through page by page. If you want to change, correct anything, or just speak out or further hold your peace. Page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just on item 58 there, responding to a question relating to the impact of asylum seekers changes on children and young people in Leeds. There's a note there that it should be in the work programme. It has again been missed off the work programme, and there's not even a note. I don't think that it needs picking up. Thank you. It's my monthly item, isn't it?
It's now the board will testify that in the pre-meeting I expressly spoke about this and name checked you. We are adding in an April meeting.
Right.
Specifically to A, make sure we complete the EHCP work, and B, to make sure that we can have some feedback on that specific item.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair.
There we are. I never forget you. Other than that, are we happy to approve those as an accurate set of minutes? Thank you very much indeed. That then brings us to item number 7. Who's going to kick us off? Okay, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the context that we're in financially, and then actions that we're taking locally. I won't labour, because of the point you made, Chair, at the beginning about needing not to be too verbose, I won't labour the point about the national context. I think we all know the situation we're in with councils going bankrupt, and the biggest pressure and the biggest risk to councils at the moment is finance around children's services. The Conservative chair of the Education Select Committee described children's services finances as presenting an existential crisis to councils, and there's been a huge amount of cross-party lobbying around the need for more funding for children's social care, largely led by the County Councils Network. And our own leader of the opposition, Alan Lamb, spoke at exec board about how he'd also added his own voice to the, charities, campaigners, councils that of all political colours that have been lobbying for the urgent need for more funding. I've just had something come through on my phone, actually. I don't know if anyone else has seen it, that the government's just announced now a 500 million boost to social care today, and details are expected to be announced later. So we don't know anything more about that at the moment, if that's going to be for adults and children's social care, if it's actually new money or recycled money. However, that is potentially going to provide some relief. But obviously, I've literally just seen that announcement now on my phone. So in terms of our situation in Leeds, the two pressures we've got the rise in the number of children coming into care, which it's nationally recognised is largely due to the rise in child poverty. If that was the only rise that we had, we would not be in the financial situation we're in. The bigger rise, which is causing the bigger pressure, is the rise in cost, and particularly in relation to external residential placements. So the way that we can reduce our overspend is by preventing children coming into care and then helping them leave care when they're in care. That's the way we will get these costs down. So the paper outlines some of the steps that we're taking to do that. We're setting up an adolescent support service. We're setting up a placement support team to provide support to children in their placements. We're setting up a reunification team, or we've set up a reunification team, which is about reunifying children with their families, to getting them out of care. There's some housing we're developing around unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people. That's in the early stages at the moment, but I'm particularly excited about that because it's likely to be in my own ward. So there are various things that we're doing to try and prevent children coming into care in the first place and then them coming out of care. But we are in a really, really challenging context, so councils across the country are equally affected, or affected more than we are, in terms of some of our neighbouring authorities in relation to overspend in children's services. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. I won't add a lot. I'm conscious of time, but really, essentially, the report just sets out the financial performance of the Directorate for 23-24, but in the context, as it says, of the proposed budget for 24-25 and also the provisional budget for 25, 26 and 26-27. It does set out the challenges, as has been described there by Councillor Venner, and also our response to those, and also our savings proposals, both in terms of invest to save and savings that we have to make within the Directorate in order to address the very real challenges that we have. I think Louise may wish to just add some detail, if that would be helpful, Chair.
Thanks, Julie. So yeah, in terms of the financial position for this year overall for the council, as it says in the report, we're looking at 35.3 million overspend for children and families. That it's 32.7 million of that total. There is quite a bit of detail in the pack that I won't cover because of obviously allowing time for conversations, but as Julie says and Councillor Venner have said, really significant pressures coming in on the children looked after. Placements around kind of numbers, complexity of need, but also market conditions as well, pushing up prices. And I'll leave it there to open it up for more conversation.
Thanks. Can I just check I'm understanding something correctly? As I understand it, since the last time this was presented, it looks like it's a worsening of the position by about 5.5 million. Is that right? And then my second question, just to make sure, do we have an idea at the moment of what a worst case end of year scenario might be looking at?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You're absolutely right. Agenda item 7 reflects the position of period 7, which was a few months ago, and it does show a worsening position. We continue to monitor it on a monthly basis, as you could imagine, and the expectation is that there will be a further set of changes that will be reported to Executive Board in the next sort of round of reporting cycles. we're not able to put a number to that yet because, as you'd imagine, it's an ongoing piece of work in terms of how that looks. One of the things that we're seeking to do, however, in terms of the next reporting cycle, is to take a further look at those areas of risk where we might have made a judgment call on what might or might not happen. So we're reviewing that currently with a view that when we get to the next reporting cycle, hopefully there should be then a finalised position for the directorate for the financial year that we would hope would not change between effectively now and the end of the financial year.
Anybody? Okay, thank you. We shall move on to item 8. Item 8 is the proposed budget. Obviously, it links in somewhat tidily. Proposed budget 24-25 and provisional budgets 25-26-27, 26-27. So, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly from a scrutiny context. So under the budget and policy framework, the scrutiny board is required consultee as part of the budget process, and the board will submit a report as part of a composite report that scrutiny does to executive board on the 7th of February, which summarises the board's views. As you will know, there was a working group in December on the same subject, and that's part of a two-step process, if you like, of consulting with scrutiny as part of the requirements of the budget and policy framework. Just to note that there are a lot of information in those papers, some of which are outside of the remit of this board, so it is very much a focus on the children and families element of those financial papers that we have. Thank you, Chair.
And obviously, we covered the larger part of this as part of our working group. Obviously, we are very alive, and Councillor Venner spoke to it already, of the national picture, the funding situation, the national envelope that we are operating within, a tight, to put it delicately, envelope of funding. Councillor Pryor, Councillor Venner, do you want to lead in on anything, or straight to Julie and crack on? Okay, Julie.
I think what I'll do is hand over to Louise again, just first time.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Chair. So in terms of this report, it's in the context, as we know, of the different financial challenges, which we've discussed around the month 7 financial report. The report includes the savings proposals that were put forward for consideration at December Executive Board, and also summarises those that were taken to October Executive Board as well. Together for the Council, that totals a proposal of 58.4 million for savings, and that's spread across the different directorates. For children and families, that represents 16.5 million of savings proposals. And that would enable us to set a balanced budget for 24-25, which we are legally obliged to do. I'll leave it there for any other context that Julie may want to provide.
Perhaps just to add, I think, to what's already been said, just about the national picture, and the fact that we have, as you would expect, scrutinised our own performance. When you look at the numbers of children looked after in Leeds and our rate per 10,000, which is currently at about 89%, it's just come down again because our population has grown. Actually, we continue to fare very well with our stat neighbours, with our core cities. So whilst we've seen an increase, we haven't seen the rate of increase that other stat neighbours have seen. Equally, what we have had in Leeds is that growth in poverty. And what we know is that there's a direct correlation between poverty and children coming into care. And, if you're living in the most deprived areas in the country, then you're 10 to 11 times more likely to become a child looked after. In Leeds, we have seen an increase again in our lowest super output areas. So I think we now have 12 of those areas which were in the highest 1% most deprived in the country. in running parallel with that, what we have also seen is an increase in the number of adolescents in the city. And again, the increase of adolescents being in those most deprived areas. So you can see the link, and it's the national link, and it's the link here in Leeds between deprivation, between adverse childhood experiences, the growth in adolescence in those areas, and the correlation between the demand and demography challenges that we've got in the city, and then the costs associated with that because of the cost of living, inflation, etc. But I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Board comments, questions, observations? Thank you. Councillor Gruen.
Sorry. You'd expect me as a member of the Corporate Parenting Board to be concerned, obviously, about children looked after increasing in number. And there are a lot of pressures around that which have a direct impact on the budget. So, for example, the strategy with the Investor State strategy of building more children's homes of our own to avoid external placements is a very good one in my view, and I was really very supportive when that was decided. However, I note from the papers that the timescale for that has become longer in order to actually balance the books, and it's also marked as high risk. So I'd like you to just take me through that process. And the other thing that strikes me is that strategies to prevent children becoming looked after, again, in principle, absolutely, I would support. But are there any dangers in that, in terms of, are we being over keen to prevent children being looked after and therefore leaving them in positions of risk or danger?
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. In relation to the small group living children's homes, it's an absolute key priority for us. In terms of our risk assessment, we want to apply real rigour to that. So we're going to err on the side of caution within that. I think the complexities around some of the small group living is recruitment of staff, is registration with Ofsted, is ensuring that when we purchase the accommodation that actually it is fit for purpose, and we need to do some refurbishments of that accommodation. So again, to a certain extent, these are things to some extent which are out of our control. But having said that, we are doing our very best to mitigate against that. So as an example, I had a conversation on Friday with the senior HMI for quality in Ofsted in the region to talk about registration. And actually, is there a means of us really to sort of expediting registration of the homes, registration of the managers? We've agreed that we'll do a pipeline so that they're aware of the homes that are coming on stream. Also a conversation about actually, can we double up in terms of some of those activities? So every opportunity that we have to try and progress and to take action to progress, we really are maximising. But equally, we have to equally be mindful that we've got to do this properly. We've got a responsibility to ensure that we're applying that rigour as we are purchasing the homes, the consultation, etc. With key stakeholders. So we're doing everything that we possibly can, but we have to present an accurate picture in terms of the risks. In terms of reducing our number of children looked after, we're really clear in Leeds, and the language that we use around that is safely reducing the need for children to become looked after. So this is not a blanket approach to reducing numbers. This is our early intervention approach to supporting families who are struggling in adversity. What we know in the city and what we know across the country, and it's reflected in the Josh McAllister review, is that historically the system in this country has been set up in response to the 10% of children in the main who become in contact with our service, where there is serious child protection issues. But the vast majority of families actually who need our support are families who are struggling in adversity. So families who are living in poverty, families where there is domestic violence, where there is substance misuse, where there is mental health issues. And that's where they need our support, but it's got to be timely, it's got to be effective, it's got to be evidence-based. It's got to be a partnership. Children's social care can't do this on our own. So working with our schools, our nurseries, our health visitors, our police. But equally, the restorative approach that we have in Leeds is about that high support and high challenge. So it is absolutely about offering, you know, identifying the needs, listening to families, about, you know, respecting their own expertise, you know, what they know, they're the experts in their families. So listening, working with, but equally being really clear where we have concerns, you know, and setting it out really clearly, restoratively, with respect, with compassion, with understanding, but being really clear about where we do have concerns and agreeing with the family where we need to make those differences. And what I would highlight there, again, is our family group conferencing absolutely underpinning that approach. You know, so Leeds has the biggest family group conference service in the country, and that is about, you know, our commitment, our continued commitment to working with families, you know, where there are concerns.
Thanks very much for that. The chair asked what the worst case scenario might be by the end of the financial year. Realistically, because you're experts and you've dealt with these pressures year on year, realistically, where do you think we'll land?
I'd hate to put a number on it, Councillor Gruen. It's a work in progress. I think what we can reassure members are that in terms of the current financial year, we are taking every opportunity to make sure that the overspend is as low as possible and is as mitigated as possible. We're fully engaging with a whole range of corporate activity around spend. And obviously, we're also looking for ways in which we can change the nature of our current spend. And that reflects, in terms of the future years, the rescheduling and rephasing of some work. I'd love to be able to give you a number now, but the reality is if I gave you a number now, it would be a number that I have no confidence in because we aren't yet completely finished with that work. So if I can have the committee's forbearance on that, and we'll get one to you as soon as that's finalised in terms of the reporting back to Executive Board.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. I had quite a few questions around the proposal to cut the multi-systemic therapy child abuse and neglect service, but in light of Councillor Venner's welcome comments about preventing people coming into care, and your comments about saving time, can you just confirm now that this proposed cut will be withdrawn from the budget and save us time?
No, unfortunately not. All the decisions that we've made about what we've put forward in terms of cuts are not decisions we have in any way taken lightly. And I would say that, again, they are in the context of 13 years of savage cuts to local authority funding and a national crisis in children's services funding. We're not cutting the whole of MST. We will still have the rest of the MST service. MST Can works with a very small number of families. It's an unpalatable decision, but it's a decision we've put forward that we see as necessary in order to make the savings that we need to make in the really awful context that we're in. We have many other ways that we support families to prevent children coming into care. We have many other ways that we work with families to support their parenting through family group conferencing that Julie's already referenced, through our family hubs, through our restorative early support teams. All of that will still exist, but we are proposing that we do cut the MST Can service, and it's a horrible decision, but it's a decision we feel we have to make, and if we don't cut that, we will have to cut something else.
The problem I have, Chair, is this: when it's framed in the idea of financial context, the figures just don't stack up to me. So the proposal is to cut a service that was set up in 2013 due to an increasing number of children coming into the social care system. And it was decided to implement the MST Can model to keep some of those most complex children who are experiencing abuse and neglect together as families. So the whole point of when we set it up was to prevent those people coming into care. That was the whole point of it. So the proposal is to cut the service, MST Can, and save £330,000 a year. But all the evidence that's been suggested and put forward by those who both work on the front line and families suggests that cutting that vital service to 60, it's not a small number, it's 60 children. So that works out about £5,500 investment per child, which interestingly is also the same figure we heard from Councillor Pryor last week at full council to justify spending £750,000 on PricewaterhouseCoopers to tell us something we already knew. So for that very small investment, there's a huge reward at the end in terms of the work that's being done. And the alternative suggested by those on the front line and parents is that if we don't keep those children and families together, they end up in the care system. So if they end up in the care system on external placements, 60 pupils, external placements, that costs £5.5 million a year. So my question to finance colleagues would be, when you've put the £330,000 saving in the budget, has any assessment been done on what the fallout of that decision is and the potential to actually cost the council more rather than saving?
Chair, if I pick that up, I think the first thing to do is just to remind Scrutiny Board that this is a proposal that has been put forward as part of the budget. We are not yet at a decision point. We are engaging with staff in terms of what the outcomes might be.
Sorry, I'm going to check. Your executive member has just confirmed, though. So I think I have to caveat your answer with what your executive member's just said.
Really clear. I confirmed we can't rule it out. I didn't confirm. Councillor Stevenson asked me if I would withdraw that proposal, and I said no, that proposal remains because of the situation that we're in. It is open to consultation at the moment. I was asked to confirm whether I would rule it out, and I said no, I will not rule it out. I will not remove that proposal.
We're certainly not going to fall out of it. I think it's really important that we're clear that the direction of travel is that proposal will be remaining. So I think an answer that starts off with it's all on the table, as it were, is probably not massively helpful to Scrutiny.
Well, I won't try to answer that particular point, Councillor Cowan, for reasons that I'm sure you'll understand. What I would say is that we are engaging with staff in terms of the position that they are putting forward, the evidence base that they are showing. We're also exploring whether there are ways of continuing to provide this service with it being at a nil or reduced cost to the council, that I'm sure all the members on this committee would agree from a value for money perspective is something that we should be doing. I can assure the members that there will be a robust analysis of this proposal when we get to a point whereby a decision has to be made. Councillor Stevenson is absolutely right, of course, that one of the considerations that we'll have to make is about the consequential impact of this. And as members will know, the budget proposals very clearly state that impact needs to be assessed, and that impact assessment needs to reflect what may happen if a decision is made. And I would just reassure the Scrutiny Board that the Directorate is fully committed to doing that.
Councillor Stevenson, you want to come back?
Yeah, just to correct the record, sorry, I misspoke earlier. I suggested that if 60 kids went into external residential, it's 5.5 million. It's not, it's 3.4 million. Sorry, it's £5,500 each. My final question was just to Tim Pouncey I think it's Tim who would answer this. On budget on this item, page 157, I think it is, where it mentions the cost saving, 24-25, it's projected that this would be a £330,000 saving. In 2025-26 and 26-27, there's a figure 0 for the saving. Should that not surely read 660,000 in 25-6 and 990,000 in 6 and 7, given the methodology applied?
The way the budget is presented here, this is effectively removing the 330,000 from the base. So if we were to include 330 in 25-26, that would double the saving. The 330 represents the cost of the 5.2 staff in that particular team and some of the proprietary licenses that we pay for. So in terms of how the budget is presented, that's removing it from the base once, and we wouldn't duplicate it by showing it again in 25-26 because that would double the savings.
But when we're told there's been a £2.5 billion cut to council funding over the last however many years, it's presented as a consolidated figure. So why are the savings not presented in the same way?
Councillor Stevenson, that's the way the budget process works. I'm afraid that we present a budget for 24-25 for Executive Board to consider. And if you look through the proposals that exist in that entire pack, what you will see is there is a whole range of proposals that have a number in 24-25, and that's a saving that is suggested will be delivered. If there are additional savings, that additional saving is shown in 25-26. If there are then additional savings to those two added together, that is shown in 26-27. If we didn't do it that way, if we did it the way that Councillor Stephen is showing in terms of saying the cumulative impact, then all of the numbers in this entire spreadsheet would have to be doubled and then tripled. And then I think we then get to the situation where we start to say we've got to save £200 million next year as opposed to saving £60 million next year.
Thank you for that answer. Yeah, Julie.
Thank you. I just want to come in really back in terms of MST Can, and I suppose just to reiterate that none of us this morning, would want to be sitting around a table where we are discussing reducing services, cutting services, closing services. But the reality is that the financial position which we find ourselves in, we have no other choice. We're local government officers. We have to have a balanced budget, and we have no choice. So we've had to put these proposals forward. When we've done that, we've also, I suppose, we have to think about the future, and we have to think also about how we do things differently. So again, when part of our consideration in putting forward some of the services that we have is looking at the full-time equivalents. So I think in MST Can we've got 5.2 full-time equivalents. They're a small team doing absolutely fantastic work. Nobody would disagree with that in this room. But also we part of the proposal is thinking about a development of the family help services. So again, in response to the Josh McAllister review, those services have got to be multi-agency. They've got to be delivered, through health, through police, through children's social care. So the proposal is not that we would lose those staff. We would want to retain those staff. We would want to retain their knowledge. We would want to retain their expertise. And in some ways, we would really look to them to be upskilling and supporting the workforce that we have in other areas. So I just really wanted to highlight that this is not about, removing that expertise and knowledge that we've got in the system. It's none of us want to be here, but we have to put some proposals forward. But in doing that, we've also thought about how we can mitigate against that, and actually where there can be a positive in terms of upskilling and mainstreaming some of that service into our family help.
Councillor Venner, Councillor Pryor, anything at all? Fine. I want to just make sure I specifically capture notes that I made when we had our working group. Some of them have come out, some of them haven't. I do want to make sure that they are properly captured. So obviously we spoke around the work reviewing the Commission services and to look at the impacts that might have. We sought and received reassurance around the life coaching staffing resource, and obviously we talked about that as well just now. We talked about making sure that we maintain skills within the service in the same way that Julie's just spoken to. Obviously, we spoke at length around the national financial challenge. Obviously, Councillor Venner, you reiterated that point, but we absolutely made that point too. And Councillor Lammers also made that point, along with Councillor Lewis, very strongly. We had three key areas of concern. We were concerned around the sufficiency of the budget. Councillor Blackburn specifically made the point about concern about we've set a budget. Obviously, there's a significant uplift to the children's services budget. And I think it's important to note that. But we were worried about actually the ability of the directorate to maintain within that budget, to maintain that budget. I suppose there's a concern added in that we've slipped, just going back to the previous paper, within this year where we thought we'd hit within and it's slipping further. So I suppose there was that concern expressed. We noted the review of the children's centre provision and the value that was placed on that service and the importance of that service. And then we also expressed concern that we've talked about the caring dads, the multi-systemic therapy for child abuse services, and the work that that is brought to the council, the vital services that they provide to vulnerable families within the city. So I just wanted to make sure we captured all of those from our working group, because obviously members specifically brought those up. I would like also just to specifically flag up two concerns that I also have. One is the reduction proposed to the Youth Activity Fund, which it's never gone up, which of course means it's using accounting terms, it's a real terms cut for all the years it's been with us, but now there is a genuine reduction, and that is going to have a significant impact on vulnerable families within every ward. My own view is that the potential implementation of parking charges will also impact the ability of families to visit some of our local parks. So I wanted to flag up those concerns. Members of the board, anything else anybody else wants to add in? Question, comment, discuss, raise? Thank you.
Just a query about cost of legal services, because I can see obviously there's a staffing underspend due to not recruiting, but then an agency locum pressure. So I'm just wondering whether, again, that's a bit of a false economy, because it's probably costing more to recruit locums than it would be to have permanent members of staff in post. But I might be wrong.
Chair, I don't think that's within the children's services saving. So I think that might be a saving within strategy and resources. I can make sure that perspective is passported to the officers in strategy and resources, definitely. I think they are probably alive to that challenge, but I can make sure it's passported forward.
Just to note, I'm the advisor to the Strategy and Resources Board as well in my other role, so I can pick that up and make sure it goes through those channels.
Yeah, thank you. I think it probably does have an impact on children's though, because the way in which cases are conducted by legal services in court, often it's the most complex cases that end up in court, decisions that are taken in the court arena around things like placements, and often decisions made about the need for, quite often, very expensive bespoke residential external placements. So they are obviously linked, but yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about that being part of the not directly part of the children's budget, but yeah, I'd appreciate it if that could maybe just be forwarded on. Thank you.
Councillor Hesselwood.
Yeah, it was just quickly on your comment regarding the budget and setting a budget for children's services and staying within that. I think the problem we have is that we have a finite budget, but it's a demand-led service, and we can put all the budgets in place, but if we get more requests and we have a statutory duty, it's a demand-led service, and there's absolutely nothing that we can do other than say no, which obviously we cannot do. And the cost of living crisis has increased, as has already been said, poverty within the city, housing issues, and this all leads to pressures being put on children's services. So although we can set budgets, if it's a finite budget, it's not going to meet a demand-led service when that demand is going up all the time. So I just wanted to comment on that.
And I agree with every word of it. But when we challenge the directorate, they are adamant that they will be sticking to this budget. And so I have no problem with the directorate answering, no, we don't think we're going to stick to this budget, as we haven't most other years, because of the reasons you've just said, in which case we need to look at it strategically as a council, say what figure is the right figure. But the directorate is confident, and they'll correct me if I'm wrong, that with the measures they have put in place for the next year, that there is a better chance, I'll live with better, of hitting the budget in the next financial year. Julie?
Yeah, so we have put our proposals forward, as we have, as colleagues have seen in the papers, around our savings proposals, around our invest to save proposals. But I have been very, very clear in every conversation that I have had that whilst we are confident in the budget, we are confident in the proposals that we have put forward, it has been and it will continue to be a major, significant challenge, not just for the Children's Services Directorate in Leeds, but for every single directorate across the country. I met last week with directors across Yorkshire and Humberside. I meet with directors from the core cities. I drove home last night. I was listening to Radio 4. Everything was around the continued demand on children's services. I drove into work this morning. Everything on my radio, again, was around the continued demand in children's services. So we've proposed the budget, we've proposed our, our invest to save, as I've said, and our savings. But it would be ridiculous for me to sit here and to say that we will not continue to face significant challenges if the demand and demography and the inflationary costs continue.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item? Yeah.
Just a follow-up comment, really. I totally accept the situation we're in and understand everything that everybody said. But of the savings proposals, a lot of them on the risk register are marked as high risk, which means that I wouldn't draw the conclusion that we are likely to hit our budget, or indeed that these high risk strategy proposals will actually bear fruit. That's my concern. And I think perhaps, thinking about the future, we probably need to know how these high risk strategies are going, rather than just look at the risk register and think, well, some of them are very risky. We know they are, but what's in place to really monitor that, if you like?
I think just to address Councillor Groon's point, I think it demonstrates the dire position all local government are in. We are having to put forward unpalatable options because that is where we are as a city, as a country. I think we can have real debates about what is causing the inflationary pressure, the demand pressure at the moment. I'm sure some people will say it's what's going on in Ukraine. Some people will talk about Liz Truss's wonderful month as Prime Minister. Wherever we are facing these inflationary pressures, and we are facing these inflationary pressures after 13, 14 years of huge cuts. And I think Councillor Stevenson really eloquently explained why austerity doesn't work, how austerity is expensive, because you end up cutting things which would save you money further down the line. Exactly the same for what you talked about, Councillor Cohen, on the Youth Activity Fund cut, parking, preventative work. These are all unpalatable options, but they are where we are. So the budget is not wonderful reading. Yes, there are a lot of high-risk strategies, but sadly we've no other option because exactly as Councillor Heselwood said, we are a demand-led service with rising demand and a finite budget.
I just want to say, I suppose, in response to Councillor Gruen, that the risks that are highlighted there are, I suppose, us, again, a responsibility to be open and transparent about the ongoing challenges that we have. It would be totally remiss and irresponsible and, inappropriate for us not to highlight that. And I think that reflects the conversation that I've just had, in terms of, the council has a, finite resource, so we have to set a budget. We have put our proposals forward, our invest to save proposals, we're doing our very best, and we're confident that we'll continue to do our very best. but we can, mitigate against the continuous challenges that we have got. And if I've talked earlier on about the increase in poverty, about the increase in adolescents, we had 57 adolescents come into care, last year. I think the other thing there, I suppose, is just thinking about, I suppose, as a compassionate city, our response to unaccompanied asylum seeking children. As an example, 100 asylum seeking children looked after in the city, 200 asylum seeking children who are 18 plus and, quite rightly are in receipt of care leaving services, and as a compassionate city, we would not want to see that any differently. But we've got to highlight the risks. In response to your question, and again, a very important question about oversight and scrutiny, we have a delivery board that I chair in the directorate. That's a cross council board. So we have senior officers from every other directorate who attend that. In addition to that, there's a weekly task and finish group, which is chaired by Victoria Bradshaw, who is our Chief Officer of Finance, again, a cross-directorate group. In addition to that, I meet with, we have a member-led oversight scrutiny group. I've been here in Leeds since 2015, and we've the scrutiny, the rigour, the obsession that we have, cross-council in terms of the Children and Families budget is. I don't know that we could be doing any more, but we're absolutely committed, quite rightly so, to applying that rigour, that scrutiny, that monitoring and taking remedial action if we feel that we have to.
Thank you for that. I have absolutely no doubt at all that the directorate is doing everything it can as rigorously as possible. I'm just doing a scrutiny job.
And it's right. I'll let you come in, but it is right that we push on this, because there's no point a proposal coming forward if it's not robust, and we need the assurance and the evidence that they are robust. And we take the risk. And we take the points that Councillor Pryor makes too. But we need to be assured, and our job here is to get that assurance around the robustness of that proposal. Councillor Venner, then Julie, and then last question from. Okay, up to you which way around.
Just to come back on that and just to say, genuinely, I understand and I respect and I appreciate the role of scrutiny and, the contribution that everybody makes around this table. That's what keeps us transparent, open, safe. It was highlighted in our last ILAC, the role of scrutiny. So it's reassuring for me, to come to scrutiny and to have the challenge in the way that we do have that open, respectful challenge in Leeds.
I just wanted to highlight the issue around scrutiny. Julie referred to there's a member board as well. That's chaired by Councillor Cooper. Councillor Pryor and I both attend. That's monthly. It's attended by Julie, Victoria Bradshaw, Phil, Mariana. That's an additional layer of scrutiny where we go through the budget and our finance proposals in detail. We're probably spending more time in meetings about finance than anything else, and that's been the case for months. We're under extreme scrutiny from the whole council, which is totally appropriate. In this council and in many other councils, children's services is the biggest risk facing councils. And that's why we need to detail all our proposals and the risks that they present. Some of our investor save proposals do have the potential to save huge amounts of money, but there are some risks within them. To give you just a really concrete example, we're opening a house called Field Terrace in Temple Newsome Ward, which is going to be for 5 children with profound physical disabilities, learning disabilities. It'll be very like Acorn House. We were calling it Acorn 2 for a while. That alone will save hundreds of thousands a year in bringing 5 children out of external residential placements or, out of other expensive placements. It's some of the delays in that have included things like the Ofsted registration. As Julie said, she's had meetings about that. When we register a children's home, it takes months to go through that process. That's months, and we could be saving money. So we need to be really, really cognizant of all those risks and have plans around them. But that's an example of something that will save money. But the risks around it were, would we be able to recruit the staff we have? How long will the Ofsted registration take? But please be reassured, we are all spending a huge amount of time on finance, more than anything else, and we are very scrutinised and very supported by the wider council. Thank you.
I have the final from Trish, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very, very well aware of the financial position in the council, and anybody that knows me knows full well that all the officers and all the elected members have every support I can give them. It's not pleasant. However, I really have concern that we are looking to save roughly half of this year's current overspend. And those cuts they're going to bite next year. So we're going to have a similar problem next year. Now, we need to look, I think, much more robustly at the impacts of what we're doing. The spend to save stuff is absolutely fantastic. That was a very clear and great example of what we need to do. But we should have been doing it a lot sooner. And you know, I know that there are resource restrictions, and I know that, you know, we have financial restrictions, but, you know, I do think that we need to look really, really closely and robustly at what we're doing. 16.5 mil of savings this year we're looking at, and yet we're going to cut 330,000 from a really important service that will impact again in future years. And I think, you know, we really need to take a longer term vision on it if we can possibly do that. And I know that everybody's doing everything they can.
Councillor Smith, I'm going to need you to.
Yeah, but I really need to make the point that we need to, you know, we need to look much more robustly at that, and it needs to come back to scrutiny.
I would just reiterate what I've said previously, which is none of us would be wanting to discuss cuts, you know, to any services this morning. But given the conversation that we've just had about the financial challenges, we have to, you know, we have no choice. You know, in order to make to have a balanced budget, we have to make cuts. In response to your points, Councillor Smith, about longer term planning and longer term vision, absolutely. And that's where, as I've said, you know, earlier in the meeting, where we're thinking about actually family help, thinking about rebalancing the system. You know, that's the national direction of travel, you know, moving away from costly state intervention and ensuring that children, you know, can receive that support. Again, you know, we're taking that strength-based family approach. So thinking about how do we, as I've already said, think about the future. How do we upskill the workforce? How do we use, you know, how do we maximise the experience and the skill and the knowledge of those MST staff as we're thinking about the future, as we're developing new services and thinking about how we upskill the workforce. So, you know, the future has absolutely been central to our thinking. This is not a snapshot position. We've got to think about where do we want to be in the future.
Councillor Vanna, Councillor Pratt, any closing comments on this item from you?
I think the only comment I'd want to make is that in terms of long-term strategic planning, that's what we've been doing, you know, over the last 13 years of cuts. We've been protecting adults and children's services. They now represent over 60% of the budget, and in 2010 it was 40%. And we've been protecting children's and adult social care, and also retaining outstanding services in the most extreme and challenging of circumstances, including through the pandemic. We are in a position now that we're having to cut into services, and Trish is right in a sense that the cuts that we're making will have an impact. And as Councillor Price said earlier, that's why austerity doesn't work. It makes you make decisions you wouldn't want to be making that will have an impact. That's the reality. But if we don't balance the budget, the council will go bankrupt in the way that other councils have. And that's why we're having to make these awful decisions. As Julie said, we really appreciate the support and challenge of scrutiny, and it was highlighted as a strength of the directorate in our last inspection. And we will continue to talk to you about the budget, about the investor save proposals, about the risks within them and the opportunities they present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I thank officers and indeed exec members for the transparency. Not messages that any of us want, but we are all alive, as I say, to the national picture. Sorry I wasn't able to bring all members in. I did say at the beginning, I am going to have to keep us quite tight on time. I can't get everyone in on everything, I'm sorry. Item 9, performance report. Councillor Pryor, do you want to kick us off? No? Okay. So I believe we've got Julie and Chris. So whoever's going to kick us off.
I'll just give a brief introduction. So essentially the performance, this report does set out, it gives information and assurance in respect of, I suppose, of the health of the children social care system in Leeds. It does include the latest performance and also, but in relation, I suppose, to the Children and Young People's Plan and the obsessions within that plan. It is the first report of this type that we've had since we've had the refreshed Children and Young People's Plan. So we refreshed the plan last year, so it now runs from 23 to 28, and it does give an update on those 3 obsessions. I'll hand over to Chris, who's going to just give us a wee bit more detail.
Thanks, Julie. The main bit that I wanted to talk about today really was just the attainment information that's covered in point 16 and appendix 3. This is information relating to the 2022-23 academic year. We are waiting for one more release of data from the Department for Education next week, which will provide the confirmed Key Stage 4 results. So there may be some very slight alterations to some of the Key Stage 4 figures, but it would be minimal, if anything. Just to say at this point on that, that's headline information only. Later in the year, there will be the annual standards report, which will provide far more detail on different cohorts of pupils, the performance there against national and actions being taken. And we will also be working on some information provided at ward and community committee level once we have the relevant data files. So then that will be shared, so we'll be able to see variations across the city, because all this information obviously is just citywide at the moment. In terms of the rest of the report, it's very much in the format that you've seen before. I think the only big difference, as Julie mentioned, is our revised obsessions, and the one that's completely new is the health focused obsession. So we provided quite scene setting information for that obsession this time, and it may be through conversation that there might be areas that you wish us to focus on in future performance updates. So that's something that we will certainly be able to do. And I think I'll stop there rather than delving in the figures and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Colleagues, questions? While everybody's thinking. Now, and those councillors who missed out last time, you get first dibs. Just what, and it ties in a little bit, I suppose, to what we're going to be speaking about shortly. But as I'm looking at our, and this is within the appendix, our tackling EHCPs, it looks like in over 90% of EHCP assessments, we're actually breaching the legal limit. Is that right?
So I think we've been really clear and again very transparent around our timeliness and the challenges that we are having with the timeliness of EHCP assessments, leading to me as director making the decision that we needed to commission external resource to really assist us in looking into the challenges that we've got, so that we can be very, very clear about them. Again, that we're open and honest about those, that we work in partnership with parents, carers, hearing from children, young people, also schools and others within the city. So that is right. And I think it reflects, again, the challenges that we have discussed previously in terms of increased demand, again, being a key feature. So you'll see that I think in the report we've had 118% increase since 2016 in
2023, we completed 954 assessments compared to 374 in 2022, so more than double. We have again, and within that, so that's 954 assessments, which have then transferred to 921 plans, again, more than double. So you're right, Councillor Cohen, and I think that again reflects the challenges that we've got, but the challenges that we are addressing, and we're committed, and I personally am committed to addressing through our work in the directorate, our work with PwC, now our work, with families and other stakeholders, key stakeholders like schools across the city, and we are going to talk about it in more detail in the next, in the next paper. So perhaps I'll stop there.
Colleagues, any questions at all? Thanks, Councillor Green.
I'm looking at the stats on page 342, and in particular the first three regarding attainment in education. I wonder if somebody could just clarify what that is actually telling us, please. It looks as though, because I'm not clear which is Leeds, but I'm presuming it's the ones that say result December to September 23. And my interpretation of that is that in terms of children's attainment and progress, we seem to be pretty much in line with our statistical neighbours and the national average even. Could you just clarify for me, please?
Is that the key indicator dashboard one that you're looking at? So
It's not headed, is it? Yes.
Yes. Just bear with me.
It's on the second side of that, the first three.
Thank you. Yes, that is showing that broadly performance is in line with statistical neighbours, which is obviously one of the comparisons that we use. And in terms of things like progress 8, that is ahead. So the picture varies. Some overall at city level are ahead, some are in line, some are behind. Obviously, the headline figures disguise a whole range of differences within that, but we have seen some increased performance within Leeds in recent years. On some of those, we acknowledge there are some gaps to some of the national figures, but with our statistical neighbours, that is broadly in line. And I think probably with regional authorities, we're broadly in line as well. But I would have to double check. I haven't got that one in front of me.
But the figures do seem extraordinarily low in terms of, we might be in line with our statistical neighbours, but are we doing well enough would be my question.
And that's where Councillor Gowen again, in terms of being an ambitious city, being ambitious for our children, we've got to have that absolute, and we do have that absolute commitment to, wanting to improve. We recognise that we can do better. We need to do better. That's where the 3A strategy, the focus on outcomes, especially thinking about our early years, our EYF, early years foundation stage outcomes are key. So there's a real continued focus on improvement. So again, we do compare favourably. Again, I think it does reflect us as a core city and the need that we have within the city, but we are ambitious for our children as a partnership, and we will continue to improve the picture.
Thanks, and I'm sure that's the case. But it seems to me that historically, Leeds has always been slightly behind, considerably behind the national average, and actually fairly low down on the statistical neighbours. That position appears to have changed, but the overall levels of attainment nationally seem to have come down. And I can't really understand what's happening there. And have we got better with our attainment than the rest of the country, or why has the pattern changed is really my question.
I think there's not one answer, to be honest. I think partly we are seeing the effects. I think this is only the second year of post-COVID results, and as you'll recall, assessments were done differently during COVID times. So there has been some rebalancing of nationally how the grades are calculated. So we have seen some reductions overall in the average pass figures. But within that, I think we have seen some progress within Leeds. So there's a number of things going on, and we would expect still to see a bit of instability in the whole system as things rebalance, but also we see some of the longer term effects of children who missed out on perhaps nursery places during the lockdown period. So it is a complex situation, and I think we are just really still getting to grips with what the new landscape tells us. So a little bit of both, I think, is fair to say.
Helen.
Yeah, I'd quite appreciate in the future an item that kind of presents that picture more explicitly, if that's possible.
Sorry, I did look at you to say because I assumed you were coming back. Thank you, Helen.
So from the last scrutiny board meeting and the looking at the 3As, although there's a heavy focus on early years and there's going to take, but there's also focus on key stage 1, key stage 2 and key stage 3, as in lower high school or secondary school, on reading and improvements there. I think we're going to be waiting quite some time for a real improvement to be seen from the early years work that's going on. But when do you expect to see some improvement from the actions that are being taken in key stage 3 and key stage 2? Has that been kind of mapped?
Can I just come in on that one, Chair? I think we have high ambitions for how we deliver in terms of education across the city for all of our children at every age group and every phase. We should be hopeful and expectant of change quickly, but of course, the more work we do earlier down the age range will likely deliver even more improvements over time. I should add, this is about how we work with our partners. You know, education is delivered by schools and by teachers in classrooms. So this is about how we drive and challenge colleagues who work in schools to deliver on behalf of all of the children in Leeds. It's not just the council that does it, it's how we work with schools and facilitate that.
Do you want to come back at all? Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to pick up on something on page 339. So children looked after. So like Councillor Gruen, I'm also a member of the Corporate Parenting Board. And I want to note in here, the number of children looked after rose in Leeds by 5.6% compared to a 2.1% national increase. I appreciate this is something that the council does not have control over, and there are many external factors. I think the national situation in particular, the impact of the cost of living, I think that point is unanswerable. And I mean, one of the other things that's very impressive is the work that's being done within the Corporate Parenting Board, the relevant officers looking to invest to save. And I'm aware of that work, and that's very important. One of the things that Councillor Venner mentions was about giving an example of Ofsted registration and the delays that were resulting there. I think it would be quite helpful for things like that, something like Ofsted registration, how much flexibility or how many options are there to speed that up? I mean, for example, if the department wants to move something, wants to progress it along, are there options there for speeding that up? Because obviously it's in everybody's interests that some of these homes are opened as soon as possible and are not held back by bureaucrats. Say a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, of course. What I would say, I suppose, as I've said earlier on in the meeting, I think it's about us taking a proactive approach as a directorate. You know, at the end of the day, Ofsted, you know, as an example, it's one specific example, you know, it's a small example in some ways, you know, but Ofsted are supporting local authorities across the country. Again, a real move across the country in terms of local authorities developing their own provision, you know, so I suppose they have their own challenges. I think it's important that, you know, again, taking that partnership approach that we highlight that. But what is within our gift is being proactive in initiating those conversations, which we did. So as I've said, myself and Farah and Ben Finlay, who's our responsible individual for our children's homes, met with Ofsted on Friday to have that conversation. And actually, there was a positive response. And I think there's a recognition, again, within the system between ourselves and Ofsted of the challenges that we've got. So I was encouraged by the response. At the end of the day, there are processes that have to be gone through, and there's only so much that we can do to speed that up. I suppose just coming back to the children looked after figures, whilst we have seen the increase and, we are below the national figures, that's always really been the case in Leeds. But what we continue to be, as I've highlighted earlier, is faring very well in terms of our statistical neighbours. I think the other thing as well, perhaps that we've not touched on, we maybe touched on it very briefly when they had the conversation about the Invest to Save proposals, is, whilst we're absolutely committed to reducing the need for children to become looked after in Leeds, we've absolutely got to have that focus on reunification. So where we do have a child who is looked after in Leeds, ultimately, our ambition and our hope for those children is that they can be reunified, to family. And that's where we, we're doing work around our special guardianship orders, etc. And again, I suppose it's really important to say that within that children looked after population in Leeds, we have 60% of our children looked after who are in-house foster care placements, whether that's within our in-house foster carers or our kinship foster carers. We've recently done some analysis in terms of comparators, around that as an example. And it's really clear that we're way ahead in Leeds in terms of having children in family placements. So I suppose I just want to highlight that whilst we need to reduce the need for children to become looked after, we equally need to, continue to have that ambition and that dedication and commitment to achieving reunification where possible. And even where we can achieve reunification, to ensuring that we enable children to maintain their links with, with family, even if that means that we look abroad, which, is not unusual for us to identify family where children can maintain their links.
I just wanted to briefly comment on the numbers. Thank you, Chair. So I get a really regular briefing on the numbers, and actually they have come down a little bit just recently. So these figures obviously have got a slight lag on them. I don't want to be over optimistic on that because they are numbers that have quite a lot of volatility in them. So if we take a big sibling group into care, for example, the numbers go up. We had a significant number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children coming to us over Christmas out of one of the hotels, which increased the numbers, but they have come down a little bit recently, both in terms of the number of children who are looked after and the number of children in external residential placements. As Julie said, we compare very well to our statistical neighbours. We've had one of the patterns, as Julie mentioned, is about increased numbers of adolescents coming into care. And we have seen long-term arrangements breaking down. So long-term foster placements, adoptions, SGO arrangements, which really emphasises the pressure families are under and why it's really important we have the placement support team that we've recently set up. The really key figure to look at isn't the raw number, it's the number per 10,000. That's how you compare across the country and across authorities. So our number now is around 89, I think. When we were inadequate, it was 95. So even with the amount of pressure that we're under at the moment, we're not taking children into care in the numbers that we were when we didn't have a really good preventative offer, when we didn't have the range of family help that we have now. I work quite a lot into other councils that are struggling, and it's not unusual to have, councils with up to 200 per 10,000 as their figure, or certainly there's a number that are over 100 that I've worked with. So, the preventative offer is really important. So is reunification. As Julie said, most of our children who are looked after are in foster care, and within that figure, we've got a much higher percentage than the rest of the country of the number of children in foster care that are in kinship care. Much higher. We were quoted in an all-party parliamentary group report as an example, as a good practice example, because we've got such a high number of kinship foster placements. Thank you.
I think maybe just like to sort of highlight one other statistic which is in the report, which is around our referral rate in Leeds, you know, the rate per 10,000 of our referral rate. So in Leeds, it's currently 64.2. Actually, nationally, it's around 54.5. So again, just thinking about the demand that we're having in terms of children's services in Leeds being significantly higher than the national picture, again, reflecting us as a core city, you know, the challenges that children and families are facing within the city. But despite that increased demand, you know, and we, you know, Farah and I go out, you know, regularly speaking to colleagues, speaking to frontline staff, you know, and colleagues who've worked in Leeds for 20, 30 years, you know, who are really saying in their experience, you know, in my experience, you know, we've not really experienced demand or complexity of need in the way that we are. But despite that, we're holding our own in terms of statistical neighbours, you know, in terms of the number of children that we are bringing into care. We're doing that safely by our family group conferencing process, working with partners, you know, and that strength-based approach to working with families who are in diversity.
Thank you. Helen, you wanted to come back?
So I'd just like to comment on page 345, the attainment data for 22-23. And I think looking at that, it is reasonably positive. You know, we've obviously got really good plans in place for further improvements. But if we look at the EYFS, the percentage achieving a good level of development, and I just want to mention something. When I went back into early years from teaching in Key Stage 2, and the moderator came in and said to me, how many of your children have made a good level of development? And that term was quite new to me. And I said, well, all of them, because I knew that all the children in my class had developed really well from where they were. But that good level of development is just based on where we expect children to be, not where they've actually started. So the good level of development there for Leeds is improving, and that's a good thing. And the other thing I wanted to focus on was the attainment 8 score at Key Stage 4, which is the actual progress children make from where they start. And again, that it has leveled off, but it's higher than it was in 2019 when it was 0.03, and it's now 0.12. And those small amounts do make a difference. If we look at Key Stage 2 as well, we have got a dip in the times table check, but if you look at the reading, writing and maths, we can see that those are beginning to rise again. And I think that's with the work that's been put in, and the dip is clearly COVID.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I think, as you say, it's small steps, you know, but it's moving in the right direction. I think just going back to the early years foundation stage, we're in conversation at the moment with health partners in the city. We've always had a Best Start group in the city, really aimed at our young children, our early years. Historically, that's really sort of its focus has been children 0 to 2. But we're in discussions at the moment, and we're really planning to move for Best Start to cover 0 to 5. And again, just recognising the importance, and it's Dan's point earlier on about that partnership approach, you know, that health, you know, and others really with that focus, you know, on attainment, really. And again, our ambition for children in the city, you know, and I am confident that we will see the benefit of that work come through in due course.
I'm going to bring Mr. Barton in first, and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. It was just really to clarify one of the points made by the councillor previously about the progress 8 score. It does appear to be sort of small, but actually, in terms of that being an aggregate across all of the schools in Leeds, to go from 0.03 to 0.12 is really significant, and it's a really sustained effort from colleagues in our schools that's driven that. So I think it's important to note, but it's not a small change. It's really significant. Thanks.
JP.
Just on a similar point on the Progress 8 score, obviously it's somewhere where we are ahead of the national average. The GLD score is something which I know a few years ago we really struggled with, and that was a focus. And actually, I think the Progress score and an improved GLD score are a precursor to a better attainment score. I think sometimes we forget that when we want to see improvements in children and their education, it can take a generation to see some of these benefits coming through. I do really want to see improved attainment scores for Leeds. I think Julie's absolutely right. We've got that ambition. And I think where we have seen improvements are precursors to seeing better attainment scores. But obviously this takes time to really work through the system. So I'm optimistic for the future.
And I just want to say as well, that will also impact positively on behaviour and then that on attendance. So it's all very much linked and as you say, needs to be looked at together.
It's making the point, isn't it, around how linked all these things often are. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Julie, I just wanted to come back to something you said earlier about, I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, a rise in the number of breakdown of placements, kinship placements and foster care placements. I just wanted to ask about that really, because obviously that's not only devastating for the children who've already had a lot of disruption in their lives, but also potentially has quite a significant financial impact for the council as well, for children's services. So you've talked a lot about obviously the early help work, which is really commendable in Leeds and has made a huge difference in terms of performance. But I just wondered if you could explain a bit more about any analysis of the reasons for breakdown of those placements. And in previous scrutiny boards, you've talked to us a lot about the support that's the additional support that's now provided to kinship carers, those relatives with looking after children with special guardianship orders and things. But I just wondered, and you've also talked about the importance of working together, which we all understand in terms of the different agencies and stakeholders, but to what extent have we looked at the reasons for the breakdown in those placements and whether those early help offers are available to those families, in terms of what we might have been able to do differently to have prevented those placements breaking down, and what further work or input or support we might need to put in place to try and ensure that as few placements break down as possible going forward.
Yeah, of course. I think there's a correlation, I suppose, between, I suppose, just thinking about adolescents, so again, a number of those, we have done the analysis and we continue to undertake analysis. I suppose what it shows us is adolescents, and again, sort of children who perhaps as they've been younger, perhaps carers have felt that they can manage their behaviours, perhaps, and what we all know is behaviour is a form of communication. So I suppose there's something again around our response to adolescents and how we support carers in particular responding to the needs of adolescents, but then thinking about early intervention and prevention, there's something around, again, our commitment to be a trauma-informed city. So really understanding trauma, and if we think about behaviour as a means of communication, then how skilled are we as professionals? But actually, how do we support carers in terms of understanding, interpreting, responding, having insight into children's behaviour? I think I would also say, all of the other things that are impacting on families right across the city, so, the impact of COVID still, the cost of living crisis, stress, anxiety, relationships, all of this, I suppose, is adding additional pressure on our carers, and we need to recognise that. In response, what we have initiated recently is colleagues coming together again across the directorate to where they feel and where they can see that there may be kinship carers, or other carers for that matter, or other families who are really struggling, and there's a concern that a child may be at risk of coming into care, or that actually we look at the response and the support that we're giving to that family, to those carers, to ensure, I'm supposed to check and challenge ourselves that there's nothing else that we can be providing, not just as a directorate, but as a partnership. I think as well, I suppose it does go back to how we work with schools again, and again, what we do see sometimes in our work with adolescents is that when adolescents as an example, sometimes come into contact with our youth justice service or, do at times become looked after, that actually our assessments and our screening process do at times highlight needs that have not been identified, so again, sort of neurodiversity, speech and language, so again, there's something there about how we're ensuring, how we're working as a partnership to ensure that we've got that timely assessment, identification of need. And this is where it does go back to our early years, how we're working, how we're upskilling the workforce in our children's centres, in our nurseries, our childminders. How do we work as a partnership to ensure that we can identify potential needs, assess those needs, but then respond to those needs. I think the other thing really, I suppose, is listening. And again, we have a number of forums that we do have with our kinship carers, our foster carers, where it's really important, that we as professionals listen, and I suppose it's my little mantra in terms of, an open mind, open heart, open will, really enter into those meetings to listen to them in terms of the challenges that they are having and to respond as a directorate and, as a partnership.
Just wanted to clarify something I say quite often about poverty causing increase in children being looked after. We've done work within the directorate around poverty proofing social work, and what I mean by that is ensuring that social workers know what the signs are of poverty, so we're not removing children for what we perceive as neglect, and actually it's poverty. What I mean when I say poverty increases children coming in is that when you have families in financial crisis under massive pressure, you get an increase in domestic abuse, mental health problems, substance use as examples, and they're some of the main reasons children come into our care and why we've seen an increase recently. As Julie said earlier, most children, like we would estimate about 10% of the work and children being removed is about systematic deliberate harm of children. It's mercifully rare. Most people want to parent their children and can't. We remove children far more for neglect than abuse. And I just, so when we're talking about placement breakdown and we're saying poverty, I just wanted to clarify what I meant about why we've got an increase because of poverty. It's about what happens to families when they're under massive pressure. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that clarification. But I think it's also particularly interesting that Julie's explained that there's been a particular rise in relation to adolescents. So I think, I think we're probably all well aware of the challenges for any parent of caring for adolescents and the impact particularly as well of technology and the way in which teenagers lead their lives now all of the time, 24/7 connected. So I suppose as well, it's about maybe thinking around is, in addition to all those things that we know particularly exacerbate the challenges of caring for children, as you've described, just things around what might we be able to offer to provide maybe carers who are not as familiar with those aspects of looking after older children, that they're not equipped, they're not technologically sophisticated themselves, all of those things that can impact on the difficulties particularly of looking after teenagers within a particularly difficult climate anyway, and all the additional stresses that come with poverty and the other difficulties that you've described.
No, absolutely. And I think we've talked here previously at Scrutiny around, I suppose, the skills, and the knowledge and experience which are key to, as professionals, for us to engage with adolescents, and the fact that as professionals, it's not everybody, that does have that skill really, and I think you've got a lot of adolescents, but you're absolutely right. And again, in terms of the feedback and the conversations that we've had with carers, they talk about actually there's a language out there, in terms of social media, that actually we just don't understand. We haven't got that, that language. Just as an example, neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, it's not just our carers. When I've met with school leaders across the city, and we're thinking about teaching staff, social workers, health visitors, actually, to what extent in our workforce development strategy across the city are we really focusing, on these sorts of issues? I suppose really that's, some of the areas that you're highlighting, I suppose, highlight why we're looking at developing that specific adolescent service or having some form of specific adolescent resource. And the plan will be, that we will integrate that into our family help. So I've talked previously about us developing our multi-agency family help teams, so that there is that expertise, and it is a form of expertise. The example I've just given about language, it's a completely new language. So that we can provide that targeted support, not only to our carers who, really want to meet the needs of the children in their care, but also professionals, because I think at times as professionals, we are also challenged. We've got a responsibility to ensure that, that we're upskilled, and that's from myself, right across the directorate.
Thanks. I've got just a couple of questions, and then I've got some other people to bring in as well. I've got Councillor Smith, I've got Helen briefly, and then Jackie. Just four areas I just want to kind of shine a light on. Obviously, the first is an absolute national situation. We've talked about it previously, but I think it's worth just flagging up that primary and secondary school attendance has shown a fall. It's a national picture. I know we're obsessed with it. I know we are across the city trying to work on it, but I think it's right to flag it up. It was concerning to see that the rate of suspensions for both primary and secondary have markedly risen. That the number of NEET young people has risen not insignificantly. And indeed, the number of not knowns, Councillor Pryor and I are always quite obsessed with the not known element. I just think it was important to, within the context of the board, just to shine a specific light on those, as much to make sure that we really track those going forward. But obviously, if colleagues want to comment on any of that, welcome to do so.
Come in first, and then I'll perhaps bring Chris in, just to maybe talk about some of the specifics. I think in terms of the sort of educational outcomes that you've highlighted there in terms of attendance and suspension, we have seen an increase, you're right, but actually, again, compared to nationally, we continue to fare a lot better in these. That's not about us being complacent. I think anybody that knows, the directorate knows that we are absolutely committed to that continuous improvement. But again, I think that does reflect the national picture, and again, just changes in attitudes, again, in particular, young people, parents, carers, following the pandemic, when we have had those, those periods where actually it wasn't an expectation that children attended school. And we know again nationally that has impacted on people's psyche. In terms of the NEET figures, I think it might be helpful just to bring Chris in just to speak about some of the nuances around that. But what I would say, and again, it's highlighted in the report, is that I did initiate last year us bringing additional resource into the local authority. So Andrea Cowens, who some of you may know, who's employed ordinarily at the college, I've asked for her to come in to take a specific lead on NEET. And actually, I think that's, we're really beginning to see the positive outcomes of that work in terms of the 14 to 19 strategy, our engagement with schools, with colleges, looking at how we track and how we have to work together as a system. This is not something that the directorate can do on its own. So I think we're seeing some real positive movement in that direction. But I'll just bring Chris in just to talk about the NEET figures, because I think there's some nuances in there, which again, I think will be helpful to have highlighted.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I think it's just worth pointing out that although we have seen a rise in the number of young people who are recorded as NEET, we have seen a significant change in the number whose status we didn't know, the not knowns, and that's reduced by about 200. So we would say, whilst the NEET number rising is something that we absolutely don't want to see, I think we would talk about increased confidence in the accuracy of the NEET figures this year compared to previous years, as we've seen the not knowns reduce. And I think that's partly down to some of the work that's been going on, as Julie mentions, with Andrea Cowens coming in. Appendix 3 talks about the National Citizenship Service and some of our strategic partnership work, which focuses both on those young people who are already recorded as NEET, but also those who are at risk. And we would hope to see continued we would hope to see improvement in this area moving forwards. I think just the other thing to say is we do just need to acknowledge that our increasing teenage population is seeing an increase in the overall cohort of young people who have some form of EAT or NEAT status, and that reflects in the figures as well. So there is a rise there. There's a number of reasons why, but I certainly would draw your attention to the not known figures coming down, which demonstrates some of the progress that's being made across the partnership in Leeds, but acknowledge there's still work to be done there.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the suspensions piece and to echo Julie's point about the kind of in relative terms, how we compare nationally, we would say that was still good, but the direction of travel is obviously something which we are rightly worried about. And to flag really the relationship between suspensions with some of the other things we've been talking about today. So behaviour, speech and language, meeting SEND need, all of these kind of ingredients are part of the recipe that will eventually drive a more inclusive system for our children. So really just flagging the relationship between all of the things we've been talking about and that as a symptom.
Thank you. Helen, briefly.
Just a quick question, going back to early years. So you said that the focus is extending to 5 as opposed to 0 to 2. So what will the 3 to 5 year olds, what will be happening for those children that wasn't happening? What new things will be happening to help them progress?
I think again, it's really focusing. Reading as an example. I think taking it into the Best Start arena, I think it gives us a strategic forum in the city, a multi-agency forum, which is going to really, really focus on those 3 to 5s in the way that historically we've really focused on the 0 to 2s. So I think, to be honest with you, I think just that shift in mindset that we need to be looking at a bigger cohort of children when we're in that multi-agency forum, I think is really, really important. Again, if I give perhaps reading as an example, and the work that we are doing with Nesta, also the work that when we've worked with Nesta and we've done some analysis around how parents, carers engage with some of our early years services, or flipping it, how we engage with some parents, carers across the city, and especially, again, in our most deprived areas. And the fact that there's some communities who perhaps for a number of issues, choose not to take advantage of the nursery offer, if you like, or free child places. So again, I suppose there's a whole range of work going on, from quite detailed work, as I've said, about take up of our early years offer, of our nursery offer, into a range of strategic partnerships that we yet need to develop. So I think it's early days, but again, to be quite honest with you, I think it's about having the conversation. I think it's about bringing the data, the analysis to that multi-agency forum and thinking differently about what we do, as a partnership to support our children aged 3 to 5. I think the other thing, I suppose, what we're hearing, and again, it's not anecdotal, I think as we're having conversations with, again, head teachers across the city, is the increased number of children who are entering primary school who really, are still non-verbal, whose behaviour is really challenging, who are still in nappies. So again, there's something there about actually as a partnership, as health visitors, as children's centres, as health, as childminders, what are we doing collectively, as a whole system, looking at the child and the family holistically to ensure that those children are ready for school and that the transition, again, that we're supporting children transition from our early years settings into school.
Thanks. Just so everyone knows exactly where we are, I have Councillor Smith, I have Jackie, I have Councillor Downs. That's going to be it for contributions. If we're going to stick to something like the timetable, then we're going to have a 5-minute comfort break before the next item. And I am aware, Councillor Pryor, of your midday call. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back on the point of the placements and kinship care breaking down typically at adolescent age group. we all know that adolescence can be challenging, as has been said. So has any analysis been done to see if there's any correlation between that and the NEET and not known cohorts? Is there any sort of lead back to that? So is it that the breaking down, because we've ended up in a situation where the adolescents that we are taking care of or taking extra care with are part of this, or forming part of this cohort? And the other point is the invaluable work that we've just been doing with PwC. How much resource and time and effort has that taken away from delivering the service that is absolutely vital across the city? Has it had an impact in the service delivery during that process? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. I suppose just in response to your first question around, I suppose, the correlation between how we are challenged as a system by adolescents. I have to say, I feel beholden to advocate for adolescents and to say that there's some fantastic things, thank God for our adolescents, because their humour, their honesty, their openness, how they challenge us as adults and professionals. I feel I've got to do a little bit of advocacy here for adolescents, because the challenges are ours. And so what I would say is the focus on education. Absolutely. And again, that's with the 3A strategy, and that being a strategy that is owned right across the directorate, but across the partnership. I chair the Youth Justice Partnership Board. We had a meeting this week, and actually the whole themed discussion in that meeting was on education. And actually, looking at the, granular data of the children who are involved with the Youth Justice Service, if you like, who are on reduced timetables, who are NEET, et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose no matter where we are in the directorate, whether it's looking at our kinship carers, our foster carers, whether it's looking at our family help service, whether it's looking at our early years education, we know that, a child's ability to read is a determinant of all of future outcomes, and that's why when we look at our children and young people's plan, it is an obsession, so we've got to continue to obsess on education. And the fact that in the same way, we've been on this journey in Leeds, that safeguarding is everybody's business, education is everybody's business. In response to your question around PwC, I think it's absolutely impossible, and I think it would be fundamentally wrong to separate out the work that we're doing with and alongside PwC from our absolute business as usual. Because if we're not, if our business as usual is not about a commitment to understanding where we've got challenges, where we've got barriers to, us being able to provide the service that we need to provide and that we're dedicated to providing to children, if we're not saying that that is business as usual, then I think we've got a fundamental problem. It is taking time, but I think it's, it is right and proper that myself, us as a senior leadership team, colleagues across the directorate have got this as a focus.
Thank you. So we wanted to come back. Okay, thank you. Jackie.
You'll be glad to know you've answered my questions already on NEET.
Thank you very much. Last contribution, Councillor Downs.
Thanks, Chair. Just 2 quick points. On the prevalence of children at age 11 who are a healthy weight, I note that where are we? Yes, it says here that our figures have gone down from 64.4 to 59.4, but the direction of travel is saying that that's bad. And then the next one down, proportion of young offenders who re-offend has gone up from 36.6 to 40.1, and direction of travel is showing as good. which doesn't sound right to me. But also the figures there are slightly concerning. I wonder what we're doing to address those.
So I've picked up with Chris this morning that there's a couple of inaccuracies. So certainly the reoffending triangle, if you like, I think is going in the wrong direction, I think. So there is some inaccuracies, you're right to point out. I'll come in on the reoffending and then I'll hand over to Chris for the obesity. So as I've said, I've been chairing the Youth Justice Service Partnership this week. And what we understand in terms of our reoffending rates is that in the main, really, they do apply to a cohort of children and young people, I suppose, who do commit perhaps your more serious offences. So it's a smaller cohort, but it's a smaller group of children who are committing a higher number of offences, and that's why we've got, you know, the performance that we have. I suppose what I would say again is it's an absolute focus on that Youth Justice Partnership Board. That's a multi-agency board. We have police, we have voluntary sector, health, you know, a really fantastic education representation at the board. We've got our youth justice plan, and it is a key priority for us. But that's why it's a small cohort of children. It is your serious offences, but it is them reoffending more than once. Perhaps Chris might want to come in on the obesity point.
Certainly, I can just add to the reoffending one. I've seen some local data that we have that is slightly more recent. The information in here is nationally published, and it works at quite a time lag. And our local data does suggest that we are seeing a reduction in the number of reoffenders as well as the number of young people who are offending. The figures are still higher than we would like, but hopefully that will come through in the figures there. In terms of the prevalence of children age 11 who are a healthy weight, we did have 1 year where we didn't report because of COVID. That information wasn't collected. That's collected through the National Child Measurement Programme through schools. So whilst the reduction there is obviously something that we wouldn't welcome, I suspect that's looking at a 2-year gap. So there would have been a slightly stepped change in that one. I think the arrow there, probably we have reported that as prevalence of children who are obese in the past. We've turned the indicator around to make it more prevalent one. So we'll just double check to make sure we've got all the calculations there in the background. But hopefully we will have the 2023 figures coming through fairly soon. So once those come out, then we can look at those and see if there has been a change in the direction of travel on that one. We also have the information relating to children at reception as well. So we would look at that one to see if there are similar or different changes there that we may need to report on in future.
Very quick, thanks, Chair. Just one other thing, you mentioned obesity. Does it also take into account underweight, which can be just as worrying?
The overall data set does have that in. Yes, we don't report on that. We've chosen the healthy weight or the obesity figure. However, absolutely acknowledge that underweight is a concern as well, and that is in the wider data set. It's a health data set, so it's probably something that health colleagues would speak with more authority on about in terms of the impact that has.
Thank you for that. Thank you, everybody, for everyone's contributions there. I particularly thank our cooperative members who took a real lead on that. On this, we purposely gave this performance report a good chunk of time because it's such a key part of what we need to be monitoring in terms of driving things for young people and families across the city. So thank you, everyone, for that. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we're going to come back. Looking at the provision of EHCP support, and Rob will introduce that in terms of fitting it into our overall scrutiny, where we are in terms of dealing with it to contextualise that. Okay, everyone, so 5 minutes, please. Welcome back, everybody, on that slightly longer comfort break, given that the milk disappeared. So we're moving to item number 10, provision of EHC support in Leeds. Be helpful, I think, if we could just reintroduce officers, and obviously we've been joined by representatives from the Leeds Parents and Carers Forum for this item. So if we could just introduce, Mr. Barton, sir, if you could kick us off.
Thank you, Chair. We met briefly in the waiting room before. My name's Dan Barton and I'm the new Deputy Director for Learning.
I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Social Care. So I cover everything to do with children except education.
Again, we've met very briefly and done some introductions, but I'm Julie Longworth and I'm the Director of Children and Families.
Hi, I'm Farah Khan, Deputy Director for Social Care.
Hi, yeah, we've met before. I'm Phil Evans. I'm the Chief Officer for Transformation and Partnerships in the Directorate.
Hi, I'm Julie Hutchinson and I'm the Administrator for the Leeds Parent Carer Forum.
Hi, I'm Heather Jaffa and I am Co-Vice Chair for the Leeds Parent Carer Forum.
Hi, I'm Maria Adams and I'm the Co-Vice Chair for Leeds Parent Carer Forum.
Thank you for that very much indeed. Councillor Pryor, who is the relevant executive member, will be back with us fairly shortly. He's had to take an urgent call and the timings have just clashed in terms of that call was always scheduled for midday, but he will be back with us very shortly. Before we kick into this, I'm going to ask Rob to, I'll look at that as if on cue. Councillor Pryor can just quickly introduce himself.
I'm Councillor Pryor and I am the Executive Member for, what's my job again? Economy, Culture and Education.
Thanks. So Rob is just going to give us an overview of where this session sits in the overall piece of our work around provision of EHC support in Leeds. So Rob, if you could please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As everyone will know, or most of us will know, there has been an inquiry going on from the Children and Family Scrutiny Board into the provision of EHCP support in Leeds. This was initiated at the start of the year, and as we've gone along, there's been a concurrent piece of work from the Children and Families Directorate that has also been seeking to deliver similar aims in terms of improving outcomes for children and families in the city through that process. This item, therefore, then brings those two elements together for board member information and for them to question and comment. That is the ongoing improvement work from the Directorate in partnership with PwC, which is at Appendix 1, and then at Appendix 2, which is a summary of a working group, an evidence gathering working group that was held by the board on the 23rd of November with the Leeds Parent Carer Forum steering group, of which we have, as the chair has mentioned, 3 representatives here. So that brings it all together under one item, and obviously a working group and the way scrutiny works, the working group comes back to the main board for the full board's attention so that anyone who wasn't there can formally hear what was discussed at that meeting. It's part of the scrutiny board procedure rules. So I think that summarises it, Chair. So, yep, over to you.
Thanks. So just really to reiterate that at this stage, the key point to note is that by bringing this report, we're bringing formally onto the record the work of that working group and the evidence that was presented to that working group. So we can now take those as formally being part of our scrutiny on the record works. Councillor Pryor, do you want to say anything by introduction, or do you want me to head straight? Okay, Julie.
Thank you, Chair. I think the introduction to today's report and to today's discussion has already been given, really. I suppose what I would want to say is that I really welcome the report that has been written following the working group. the fact that the way in which that does highlight and the voice, the voice of parents and carers within the city. Across the Children and Families Directorate, part of our improvement journey, and specifically, I suppose, thinking about children's social care, has been an absolute commitment to voice and influence, and I talked earlier in the meeting about working with, really respecting children and families, and in particular parents and carers, and your lived experience, you being experts in your children's and in your family's life. So I suppose I want to say I really welcome this this report and seeing your voice, written. What I also want to say, I suppose, is just when I came into the role as Director of Children and Families, and I suppose beginning to undertake my responsibility, not only for children's social care. I had been Deputy Director for Children's Social Care previously. So coming into the role of Director and having responsibility then for learning and children's social care, it was really apparent to me quite early on, that we did have some challenges within our learning inclusion, and in particular around our EHCP process and the service that we were delivering to children and families, and the extent to which we were fulfilling our statutory and legal responsibility. And, as you can imagine, that was a serious, significant concern for me. It was clear at that time that we'd had a backlog. I suppose I did have the option as a director to think about, how do we clear the backlog, in a sense? And as you would expect, there was a lot of focus on that. I don't really like the term, I suppose it's around, how do we address the fact that some children in the city were not receiving the statutory service that they should have received, so how did we address that issue? But I suppose as time went on, and quite quickly, it was apparent to me that it was, or my hypothesis was that actually it felt that it was broader than EHCPs in a sense, and that actually, what I really needed to do in my new role as director was to, I suppose, have some independence. So in my decision to commission PwC, my focus was really on the need for a root and branch review of a whole end-to-end service and end-to-end process. The danger in some ways with focusing on the children and young people who were still waiting for their EHCP assessment would have been that would have missed really potentially the broader issues that perhaps I felt we had within the service. So it was really, really important to me that we had that independent, objective view, that external critical challenge to us as a directorate. And also, really, really, really importantly, that we that led us to have a really clear, robust, clear plan of action in terms of how we were going to address those challenges. But also, I suppose, coming into role, recognising the need for us to be really clear about our vision. What's our vision in Leeds? What's our ambition in terms of us meeting the needs of children in the city who do have complex needs? What are our priorities? What are our obsessions around that? So again, my decision to commission PwC was to do just that, was to have a broad root and branch review to give us a really clear understanding, an objective understanding as well, of the issues that we had, and a very clear plan of how we were going to address those. But also, again, we've talked earlier on in the meeting this morning about the future, and thinking about, what do we want for the future? So that has come at a cost, and I understand, I suppose, concerns, and I just want to be really open and honest and transparent about that, and I know, I understand, and I'm aware that there may be concerns about the cost that, the cost of the authority, the director of that. But in my view, that was absolutely necessary to give us the rigour, the depth of review, that transparency, as I've said, and really, really importantly, a clear action plan. I think the other thing for me as well is central to the improvement journey that we have been on within children and families has been that commitment to voice and influence, as I've already said, and the importance of PwC, again, as independent of the local authority to be able to, also engage parents and carers and children and young people in the process. And I'll leave it there, Chair, but thank you.
Thank you for that. So shall we move over to Phil? Do you want to introduce the directorate report and improvement work at Appendix 1? So what we'll do is we'll do that. Then we'll have the input from LPCF on predominantly on Appendix 2, and then I'll open it up to the board for comments. Can I reiterate, we've all read everything that's in front of us?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Absolutely. And I think what's presented is effectively the paper that went to Executive Board. Just to remember of timelines is probably helpful, just to remind the board that we took a paper to Executive Board that said this is the problem. We then took a further report that said this is the work that we think we are going to do in terms of getting to a solution, and that's where the PwC work is coming in. And just picking up on the point that Julie has made is that of the expenditure that's been incurred, the overwhelming majority of that expenditure is on this last phase. It's not on the looking at and considering. It's about how do we get to a better place. And so there's the rump of that expenditure is supporting this paper effectively. What we set out, because obviously this is a continuing work in progress, we're working every week. Dan and I are meeting twice weekly with PwC and colleagues and engagement about what we do to take this work forward. But this paper sets out some broad principles of how we would want the organisation to respond to that. I think the key things probably are at 1.3 in terms of where we think the opportunities are, and in terms of where we think those principles are in terms of how we take this work forward. The report then, and I apologise for it, goes into a little bit of technical detail about how we will do this from a practical and a methodology sort of process. And this is just though to give you members a flavour of the complexity, but also the fact that we are trying to move at pace. And so we're taking a sprint-based process and techniques in terms of how we move from where we are to where we need to be. Two key milestones realistically is that we want to be able to launch internally within the council a new set of arrangements in April. That's a challenging timeline, but we seek to do that because we do need to make change, and we also want to align it to the financial year. And then there's a further piece of work that won't be supported by PwC. We've already made that decision, and that's about how do we then work with schools in terms of what schools might or might not need to do in terms of schools being ready from the new academic year in September, in terms of how that then progresses. I'll pause there at that stage, Chair. Happy to take any comments on that bit or pick them up in the after colleagues from the parents forum have commented.
Thanks. I think it might be actually helpful if there are any specific comments at this stage on that specific report before we bring the two streams together, before we hear from the parents and carers of forum and bring the various streams together. So any comments on that report? I would just make one, and I understand why it is as it is, but it does feel rather light to me, if I'm very honest, and very jargony. It's all very, given we're at, I've lost myself now. We're at page 359. Is that specific report? It just feels, given the gravity of what we're talking about, it all seems very poppy, very lots of buzzwords, it all feels very lovely, but it doesn't really tell me a huge amount, if I'm honest. I'd have liked to have felt that this was addressing things in a bit more depth, with a bit more granular data, with a bit. Now it might be that that's coming, but that's just what I felt when I read it.
Shall I respond to that, Councillor Cohen? Absolutely live to that, challenge. I think in my introductory remarks, I reflected on the fact that because it's a set of process methodology, there are elements of jargon in there that if we could avoid them, we could do, but it's a challenge. I think it's also about reflecting when this went to executive board. So this went to executive board in December. So what we did was we took a paper that said this is the problem, and we very, very clearly wanted to take a paper that said this is what we're committing to do. By the very nature, that isn't going to get into the detail of what that doing will look like. And that's why this is very broad brush, setting out principles, setting out challenges, but very clearly saying that we will do this in a way that is thorough, is robust, is child-centric, and takes the views and considerations of others at heart. My expectation, and I haven't discussed this with Councillor Pryor, so he might shake his head at me, is that we will bring a further report to executive board that sets out what this will look like in terms of the changes that will be made and what those changes will look like and the impact those changes will have. I can assure the board there is volumes and volumes of very, very detailed activity and analysis and work that's being undertaken right now. If I brought all that back to the scrutiny board, you'd get a report basically the size of the budget report that you've got. And what I really need to do is get to the point whereby that's distilled into this is what it's going to mean. But when we're at that position, I'll absolutely bring that back if that's the request of members and subject to Councillor Pryor being comfortable with that in terms of how we report that in terms of executive board and scrutiny board. But yeah, just to reassure the board, it's such a high priority for us, and there's really, really valuable work that's going on at a level of depth that, put simply, we wouldn't be at if we weren't absolutely committed to making the changes that we think are needed.
And I assume within that, of course, there'll be the feedback from this board as well that would be feeding into that process. I'm pleased to see nods because that wasn't mentioned initially.
Yeah, we're trying to align as best we can the two strands.
Okay. Councillor Blackburn.
I'm going to leave this till later, but seeing you brought that up, I mean, looking at this, I mean, it would seem to me why the problem is we have a group of people who feel let down, and that they're not being helped through this process. And there's nothing in this document here that seems to me to say, here, we're there to help you, because that's what really people are after. And it's like a competition that you're entering, and you pass or you fail, and we've got to change that.
Julie, then Dan, then bringing Councillor Stevenson, then Councillor Gruen, and then we're going to move on.
So I think the purpose of scrutiny, as we talked in the earlier part of the meeting, is just that, for us, to get challenge, for us to take that challenge away, to reflect on it. I think, I want to acknowledge the comments that have been made, and I have heard them and I'm listening to them, and we will absolutely take those into account in terms of future reports. Councillor Blackburn, just in response to that direct comment, again, then we need to reflect that differently, because, the priority, the time, the officer time, the resource, which we've committed, absolutely reflects the how can I put it, the priority that we are giving this matter. And I think, and you're right, you're right that what we have heard from parents and carers, children, young people, is that they do feel let down. They don't feel that at times they have had the support that they need. And again, there is the issue, which we're not going to shy away from in any shape or form, around timeliness. And that's, to a large extent, one of the things that we have highlighted as a priority for us is about culture and is about practice. And if I talk about the journey that we've been on in children's social care and that commitment to restorative practice, which is all about a strength-based approach. It is about working with, it's about being respectful, having compassion, having empathy. listening to the people who we are seeking to support and ensuring that their views are shaping and developing our services. And I am sitting here, giving the board, and the parents and carers that we've got here today, my absolute assurance and commitment that that is what we're going to do. So if that's not reflected, as well as it should be in the report, then we'll absolutely make sure that that is changed in future, because we are absolutely committed to that. It's been central to our improvement journey in children's social care. It's a golden thread in our children and young people's plan. Dan and I have committed that we would like to meet, with our parent carers representatives that are here this morning, this afternoon, I think we are now, because we're absolutely committed to that. You have expertise, that we don't have, and it's, your views and experience of the service are absolutely critical to the improvements that we need to make. So, we've listened to what's been said already in terms of scrutiny and challenge, and we appreciate that.
Dan, briefly.
I won't duplicate too much of what Julie said, but I think it's worth just pointing out, as someone who's joined the authority very, very recently, that the content of the conversations that I know have taken place as part of this review, which may very well not be reflected in the summary sort of report today, gives me a degree of confidence that the commitments that Julie and I have made will come through and shine through in the plan. And I think as well, there's something about the role that I need to play in that as well, in terms of reaching out and building relationships with you and listening. We are doing this work for your children and for your families. And so it therefore necessarily follows that you have to be a lead partner within what that kind of plan looks like going forward. So that's a commitment now from me personally in my new role to engage with you regularly and honestly on that.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks, Chair. I mentioned earlier the value of spending so much on this, and I take Julie's points and seeking to address those. One of the things I still struggle with is that bit of the pressure is either all external, and I think I've said here previously, there's a cross-party view on that issue that not more needs to be done nationally to address this key issue across local authorities. So it's either all national and external, or the stuff we can do internally, and I guess there's an acceptance that there's the stuff we can do internally, because that's why we've commissioned the report. The council's own statutory assessment and provision lead recently said publicly on decision making around placements that in Leeds we call it, quote, scattergunning, shooting in the dark and helping it hit something solid. Are those comments that you'd recognise within the directorate? And if so, how certain can we be that the work we're doing here, or PwC are doing here, will deliver an outcome that changes that approach that officers within this department currently say is going on?
So I've spent 40 years now working with children and families in health, in education, in children's social care, in the voluntary sector, in the not-for-profit. And throughout my career, I have been absolutely committed to continuous improvement. And my benchmark is what I would want for my own children, grandchildren, brother, sister, mother. That's what I want for the children and families in Leeds, and nothing else is going to be good enough. We've been on a journey of improvement, as I've said. I'm committed to being open and transparent, which we have been. I would like, to think in the reports that have come previously about the work that we need to do. There is no place at all in the directorate for complacency or, I suppose, for not acknowledging the challenges that we've got and our commitment to address those. For me, and again, I'm speaking personally because, in the directorate role, it's my responsibility to model and ensure that we've got best practice. And part of that goes back to what I was saying earlier on about culture, about values, about principles, and for me, this is a vocation. You know, when I chose to come into social work and chose to work with children and families, it was genuinely about making a difference. You know, it was about working with, as I've said, and recognising, to put it bluntly, some would say, for the grace of God go I. You know, but key to that in every single role that I have had, no matter where I've been in my career, has been partnership work. And when I talk about partnership work, I mean really working with, you know, children and families, the people that we seek to support. So there is no room at all for complacency, and absolutely the opposite. You know, what we are driving here is an absolute commitment to continuous change, and we will get it.
Thanks, Stuart. And just linked to that, it'd be useful to hear, I think, from the parent group in terms of, we discussed last time, your lived experiences of it. In terms of that suggestion of like scattergunning and hoping it hits something, that was a quote. What do you think is needed out of this report from PricewaterhouseCoopers in terms of?
I'm going to just hold that for now. I just want to focus. Okay, thank you. Councillor Green.
Put simply, my reflections on this report are that it outlines some really fundamental processes that you're intending to bring about. And in particular, I would say under 1.8, 2 bullet points: improvements in engagement with school settings and wider stakeholders, and rapid improvement of communications across the service, including Those are so difficult to do and so incredibly difficult to describe in a report. They are as much to do with style of leadership, personality, personal communications, and commitment of the staff on the ground, genuine commitment of the staff on the ground. Because when I heard the personal stories, what I actually heard most of all is that we as a council do not listen well. We don't listen to you. You felt you weren't being heard. And these 2 things I've just picked out of those bullet points are designed to make us into much better active listeners. It's a massively difficult task. I wouldn't really necessarily expect to see a lot of detail around those, but they are such complex processes that I think we do need some sort of system to measure how they're coming on. And of course, who better than the families and parents and carers and children within the group that this is designed to help.
Thank you. Well, I think that is the perfect, if I may, lead in to hand over to the Parents and Carers Forum for any comments you might want to make at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, when we come to say our piece, Ellie, we absolutely felt listened to, and we come away like feeling on cloud nine. Slightly disappointed, if I'm honest, about this report. So the report that you've given all our evidence is absolutely spot on. That's brilliant, and it reflects everything that we say. But all this paperwork, and I know you're presenting it not to parents and carers, and I know it's all, you've got your ways of doing it, but it doesn't reflect anything that we inputted. And that's just a bit disappointing. And I know you've got all your strategical stuff going on, and I appreciate that, but it doesn't reflect anything that we've said, and that is quite disappointing.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt because I just need to understand. I want to make sure that I'm understanding. Are you concerned that page 370 of the pack doesn't reflect what you told us when you came to see us? Or are you concerned that the officer report right, I'm just making sure that you are satisfied that we captured what you told us when you came here. Right, because obviously that's the bit, as it were, as a scrutiny board that we control, and if we'd let you down there, then I'd want to make sure we address that. Right, I'll let you hand back. Thanks, sorry.
I'll come in and then I can see Dan put his hand up as well. So I'm sorry that that's the case, because that's not what we would want. And again, as I've said, in children's social care, And again, right across the directorate, but part of our improvement journey in children's social care, and this is my absolute commitment, has been a you said, we did approach. So when parents and carers are saying to us, you know, this is how we feel, this is what needs to change, we have got a responsibility to come back to you in due course and say, this is what you told us, and this is what we've done. What difference has it made? Yeah. So again, I think as we go forward, and it is really, really looking at the next piece of work, which is what are we going to do? Yeah. And again, Dan and I really want to meet with you. And I think we need to evidence that we've listened to you, that we've heard you, but most importantly, show what difference has that made? What have we done? Yeah. And ultimately, how are children and families in the city any better off? So again, I absolutely commit, you know, that is what we will do. And I'm sorry, you know, genuinely that you feel like that, because that's not what we would want. I'll hand over to Dan.
Thank you. I mean, I wanted to say sorry as well. And ultimately, we've heard a couple of times this morning now about how that report doesn't necessarily reflect what's been said before. And I think we need to take that as a really important learning point and to sort of reset that relationship now, because and I suppose I want to speak about this hopefully as well, because I think that the fact that you felt so listened to as part of the engagement part of this work is really important. And I think that if we can use that as a platform for how we go forward together and sort of co-producing the detail of the plan, doing that with you, not doing it in the background and presenting it, but doing that with you over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, I think is going to be really important. So I hear that you don't feel that your voices and your family's voices are reflected in that report, and I will take that on board, and that won't happen again.
Yeah, I think it's important to reiterate that the process of today, as it were, is to bring into the wider piece the work that we did with you at the last meeting, and to formally now bring that into the decision-making frameworks and the recommendations that this board is ultimately going to make. So in a way, I'm not hugely surprised that a lot of what you said wasn't earlier captured, because it's today's the first time that formally that work comes into that wider domain, if that makes sense. Today's, as Rob said at the beginning, about bringing these streams together, the work that PwC have been doing and the work that we've been doing to bring the streams together to come to some meaningful recommendations that we as a board will make sure are monitored and taken forward, along with everything that the director has said they are going to do as well. So I think it's about contextual. In an ideal world, of course, none of this would be necessary, but we are where we are, and it's about making sure that we capture what you've told us and run with it, but making sure that obviously we formally bring it forward. Sorry, I thought it was important to reiterate that part. Is there anything else that you want to specifically add before I open this up? What generally for the board? Obviously, the board we're at the working group, and of course, we've had the report. So is there anything specific? Okay, Ryan, you wanted to come in.
I think the point was addressed, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anybody, comments, questions, observations? Yeah.
Chair, if I can, just taking us back one step, as the author of the report that went to Executive Board, and as the senior officer who was here when the Parent and Carer Forum met, I just want to reassure you that absolutely what was said was heard. There are issues of timing because you came to the board on the 23rd of November and this report went on the 13th of December. This report is a follow-up report to a first report that went. As I said, the messaging that you've given is absolutely captured in all the work that we are currently taking forward. The summary, my notes from your meeting have been shared. The summary that's been prepared has been shared. That's been socialized within the teams. And the challenge that I've put to the team is, how are we going to respond to these views, feelings, and perceptions? And it's absolutely at the heart of what we will need to do. It isn't going to get captured here in this report. I absolutely guarantee, as Dan has done, it will get captured in the output. And I think that's the key thing, because what you really need to know is not that we've listened. What you really need to know is that we're acting on what we've heard and what you've said. And that's why I think the next report is the one that's absolutely vital, because that's the one that sets out how does the council respond to the challenges that, to be fair to the council, as Julie said, we acknowledged and commissioned before we had that direct engagement. But there's been nothing that's been said to us that, we haven't alighted to. And that's one of the reasons why we've committed to doing that independent root and branch review that looks at every single opportunity we can get to getting a better service in place for your children.
Who are you signalling to, Ollie? Councillor Edwards.
To be honest with you, I was just going to talk about language, and actually sometimes, at times as professionals, it's helpful to us to have the challenge that we've had this morning and just think about really plain language, because actually, these are public documents, and at the end of the day, they're there for the public, to understand, what we're doing, what our plans are. So again, I've heard from you today the importance of language, actually, and I just wanted to make that point, that is something we need to take away and work on.
Thank you, Chair. This is page 365, 5.1 and 5.0, the dedicated schools grant. So it says in 5.1, Leeds is currently not receiving the full allocation as there is a gains limit factor on some of the funding increases. Could you say a little bit more about that, please, to explain a bit more about that? I mean, one of the things that I'm sure many parents across the city would ask if they read that is why not? So it says that Leeds is one of 32 local authorities that will continue to have their funding capped. So why? Why is that given the pressures? I appreciate this is probably a national thing, and given that, what representations are being made to ensure that we are fully resourced given the level of need?
So if I could just come in on that one, this is about the national funding formula and how it works, and also how it reflects the growth in demand that we've had. And so one of the checks and balances that the Education Skills Funding Agency and the national funding formula have is to prevent both as a kind of a losses cap or a floor, and also a gains cap from year to year. So the amount of money that any particular authority can have essentially can't go beyond a certain percentage increase compared to previous years because of the formula. So I think that's what's been described there. I'm not aware that we've made any representations at this point, I'm afraid. Sorry.
I've made a number of representations. I think Dan's absolutely right. It is a national funding formula and it's linked to population increases. I think were an authority to hit the cap just 1 year, I think it wouldn't make an enormous difference. We've hit the cap for a number of years, which means actually we've fallen quite far behind over the years. I've written to every Secretary of State for Education since 2018, so I think that's 7 of them, I think. Every single time the reply has just been some standard reply about, well, this is the formula, get used to it. But there are a number of authorities in a similar situation to Leeds where we've been hit year on year by the cap, and that cumulative effect, I think, has been detrimental. I think going back to comments made earlier, whether this is a national issue, is it a local issue, is it something we can respond with? It is absolutely a national issue, and I think the papers we're bringing forward are our Leeds response to try and fix what we can fix, to do better what we can do better. But there is a wider national picture, which I think is reflected in that shortfall in funding that Leeds is receiving.
I think it's fair to say, I don't think there are many councillors across the piece who would differ from the view that we are unfairly treated by that funding cap. It's all well and good when it protects you when you're on your way down, as it were. but it does mean that vulnerable learners aren't getting access to funds that on paper they should get to. It's, you know, I don't think there are many councillors who would seek to defend that. It ain't defensible, in my view. Anyone else? No? Okay. Rob, do you want to just frame this in the wider piece, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so to address to some degree the point Maria made about the input of, and obviously the Chair spoke to already about the input of the LPCF in through the working group, that will formulate and be a key piece of evidence gathering for the board in our work and as we develop our recommendations. So obviously taking on board the comments already made, but that's also another element to that in that it will inform the work that we're doing as an independent board as well. So just to close out. So the next steps, there is in the recommendations, I think it's recommendation C, there is the board are asked about timing of the next report on this. And there is currently a survey going on of parents, carers and of young people in the city. And subject to approvals, that will be the next step that we bring to the board in February, hopefully, if we can get the timing of it all right. So that's where we're moving with it in terms of next steps. We are planning to do an inquiry report, whether it be interim or potentially final, I think, in this municipal year, which does mean under the next item on the work programme, I'll be talking about a additional meeting in April for the board to conclude that work. So just to come back a little bit on that, Maria, just to give the board's perspective on it as well. Thank you.
Can I just say the survey that you're on about actually hasn't been sent to individual people. It's on Facebook, it's on social media, unless it's happened over the last couple of days. It's not been sent to people with the HCPs, which I would have thought would have been an easy thing to do because you've got all their emails addresses. So it's actually not reaching the people it needs to.
Again, thank you very much for that, Maria. That we'll take that away and we will act on that. I wasn't aware of that, so we'll take that away and act on that.
Which does highlight one of the things, of course, we've looked at having someone from the forum sitting on the board to bring some of that intelligence through. Although, of course, I should have been alive to it because I would have received it. And I haven't. Okay. Is there anything else? I'm conscious that is there anything else that you want us to take away before we close this part of the session?
Just that we're really happy to have this opportunity to work alongside you, and we absolutely will work alongside you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for your contributions to that overall. So we've happy to note the comments and the aims and ambitions of the directorate-led improvement work, which was set out in Appendix 1. We're noting the working group summary at Appendix 2 and bringing that formally onto the record. And we're considering the timescale, and we're looking at the timescales for bringing the work forward, as Rob just discussed. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, thank you. That brings us then to item 11, the work programme, some of which we spoke about briefly in the pre-meet. Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so as I just alluded to, there are some potential changes to the work programme, but just to formally introduce this item, Appendix 1 is the latest version, which could be subject to change based on what we've just discussed. That's attached to Appendix 1. Appendix 2 is the Executive Board minutes from the last exec meeting in December for board members to raise any issues that they feel may be relevant to the board's work. In terms of update, members will have noticed that there's now an item in March on the draft Youth Justice Plan, which is a budget and policy framework item similar in many ways to the budget item we considered today, in that it's required for Scrutiny to provide a response to that before it goes through the various decision-making processes at Exec Board and Full Council. So that has now been moved on to the work programme for March. We do need to consider, as the Chair referenced, the pre-meeting discussion. I'll formally reference it here, around an additional meeting in April, which would pick up the work that we're talking about on EHCPs, but also, Councillor Martin, the point that you raised under the minutes, which is around the impact of asylum on children and young people in the city. So that is the plan, subject to getting a date agreed, that we'll look to get an additional meeting to tidy the board's work up this year. And lastly, Chair, you did reference, I can't remember if it was pre-meet or in the meeting, but the possibility of a SEND representative on the board. So subject to the board being happy with me exploring that, I will seek to bring a more detailed report, which will set out how we consult on that with executive and leadership and the various interested parties to get that as a co-opted member or an assigned co-opted member for the next municipal year. Thank you, Chair.
Being cheeky, I'm conscious we have executive members here. Does anybody have any comments as to not wanting to look at taking that forward? I think it would, the view of the board has been, it would be quite helpful. But I am minded that I'm not putting anyone on the spot, so I don't feel you've got to say anything now. But is everyone happy that we proceed on that basis? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We will look to circulate dates for the additional April meeting. We are going to do our level best to avoid school holidays because obviously they're quite funky in April, just when Easter falls. Then obviously Leeds has the first 2 weeks in April, and then not that this applies to everybody, but it is the festival of Passover, which impacts on when the chair might be able to be here. So I don't mind not being able to eat bread, but it's a bit difficult when it's an actual festival day. So we will probably be looking at week commencing the 15th of April, whatever the Wednesday of that week is, 15th, 16th, 17th is probably the date we're going to be looking at. So I just float that for your virtual diaries. So is that okay with everybody? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Wonderful. Our next meeting, Thursday, the 22nd of February. It is a Thursday, you will have noticed, not a Wednesday. So I specifically, and it's also in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. Rather, so don't turn up at 10 o'clock unless you're going to bring sandwiches. Pre-meet, as usual, 15 minutes beforehand. Thank you all. I did promise at the beginning of the year to never go past 12:30. We tried. Thank you, everyone. Meeting closed.